Welcome back to another exciting episode on the show. And you guys know I always bring the best of guests to my show. And once again, today we have a very wonderful guest. Today's guest is Dorsey. He's an author, evangelist, and inspiring speaker whose life is a powerful testimony of faith, perseverance, and hope. Born with Apert Syndrome, he has overcome bullying, countless surgeries, and impossible odds to earn a degree in youth ministry and dedicate his life to encouraging others. His message is simple but powerful. With God, no obstacle is too great. Dorsey, welcome to Leading Secrets in Books.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hi, Dorsey. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
All right. So, can you tell us about growing up with Apert syndrome and the challenges that
Yeah,
you face?
yeah. So growing up with Apert syndrome is a birth defect of the hands and the face. And when I was born, my forehead was pushed outward, my eyes and nose were pushed back into my head, and my fingers and toes were fused together, meaning I had no individual movement of them. And I also had no growth spot and no room for my brain to grow. And usually, normally you're born with a growth spot to allow the brain to grow and allow it to function normally. And I did not have that. And because of that, the doctors told my parents that I would become, brain dead and that I would not survive, and to put me into a institution. I was born back in January 16th, 1977, because they did not have all the testing and the technology like they do today to determine the health of the baby and the strength of the baby to see, what see what could happen. And, they told my parents, hey, this is what's gonna happen. We don't think he'll survive, and we think that the best option for you would be to put him into a institution. And thankfully, my parents decided that they could not do that. That that's something that they would not want to do because of their faith and their belief in God. They said, no, we can't do that. We're not going to put him into a institution. And they decided to take me home, and they took me to another hospital in New York City where I was born. And the doctor there said, well, we can operate and we can, relieve the pressure on his brain, but we don't know how long he'll survive for. We don't know how long he'll live for. We think maybe he'll live, they gave my parents, doctors at some point gave my parents a number of 18 years that they did not think I would live past that age. And I'm now 49 years old. And, growing up, I was teased, made fun of, picked on, called monster and freak. To this day, there's people that still, make fun of me and tease me and, call me names and, stare at me and, probably wonder, hey, what happened to him and, what's wrong with him and think of that nature.
All right. Thank you so much. So, what role has faith in God played throughout your journey?
Yeah, my faith in God has played a big role in my life. Obviously, I grew up in a Christian home. I always attended church. My parents never, put me into a bubble and said, hey, because of the way that he looks and, because of the stares that we'll probably get or the look that we'll probably get, we're not going to kick him out and we're not going to, take him out into the neighborhood or into the community that we lived in. They, took me to church, and the people in the church, they loved on me. They cared for me, they prayed for me. Every time I was in the hospital, they would pray for me. And, if I needed, blood transfusions, the people from the church would come and, support me in that way, and probably other ways as well. So they loved on me and they cared for me. And growing up, I, became a part of the youth group. I accepted Christ at the age of 13, and I, became, part of the youth group. And, the kids in the outside world, as I said earlier, they were the ones that teased me and made fun of me and picked on me and would call me names. But the youth group, the kids in the youth group, they loved on me. I think regardless of where I went with the youth, whether it was a camp or, a youth retreat and things of that nature, the other kids that I met and other leaders that I met, they all loved on me and they all cared for me. Nobody, as far as I know, no one ever, questioned, hey, why does he look like that? Or, why does he, look like that? And, I've told parents who have young kids, you know, and they apologize sometimes when their kid says something, and the kid, 4, 5, 6 years old, at that age, they don't understand. So I told the parents, like, look, I was like, I appreciate him asking me the question. I would rather have the kid, ask me questions about my disability and why I look the way that I do than have them stare at me and have them point at me. Even the adults or, young people, if they're listening to this and they see me out in the street or see me on Facebook or whatnot, and they got questions, DM me, DM me and ask me questions. I'll answer them to the best of my ability. So my trust in God, was always maybe not always sound, but it was definitely there. Obviously life, the Bible says that we will have tribulations. Life is not going to be an easy road for any of us, and it definitely wasn't an easy road for me. So, but I kept continuing to put my trust in Him and to put my faith in Him and to see where He was going to lead me.
Okay, thank you so much, Dorsey. So, what was your experience like in school and in college?
Yeah, my experience in school and in college was, it was difficult for me. I have a learning disability. I didn't do that well in certain classes and in certain subjects because of my disability, especially when I was in different grades. In the younger grades, I was in and out of the hospital a lot because I've had so many surgeries. So I had to miss school a lot. And, thankfully back then, because I went to a school for people with disabilities, they had someone on staff that would come to the house and teach me and to tutor me and to help me to keep up with, the work that I was missing while I was out, on leave and out on, recuperating and everything from the surgery. So it was difficult for me in that sense because I was missing a lot. And, thankfully, like I said, somebody came to the house and tutored me and took, helped me to try to keep up with the schooling as best as I could. And, you know, you know, texting wasn't always an easy thing for me. I didn't learn and I didn't, wasn't able to comprehend things as quickly as other people could. And so I didn't do well on certain tests. I didn't do well on certain subjects. So as I got older, I started to wonder, what would I do? Would I go on to college? Would I go on to a trade school? Would I, do X, Y, and Z? Because not every student that I went to school with was able to go on to college. Some of them went on to trade schools, some of them went on to live in group homes, or just went on to live, with their parents. And one of my desires was to go on to college. I wanted to, you know, during my late teenage years, I started to feel a call of God in my life to be a youth minister and to, speak to the youth. And I had to have a meeting to determine what I would do after I finished high school. So at this meeting, my mom was there, and my mom and my dad were both big supporters of me, and they always allowed me to, figure out for myself what I could and could not do. And couldn't wasn't very much. And they had asked the high school history teacher who was there, do you think Dorsey will be able to make it in college. And he said, no, I don't think that Dorsey will be able to make it in college. I don't think he has the ability to make it in college. And then they asked me, do you think you'll be able to make it in college? And I said, yeah, I think I can make it. And my mom was then, and they even asked her, they said, what do you think? And she said, if he thinks he can make it, he will. And I started to go on to community college. And the first couple of weeks of community college was very different from, the college I was attending, or the school I was attending, rather, excuse me, because the school I was attending, was a very small school, maybe 10 to 12 students in every class, only a couple of hundred students in the whole building from kindergarten all the way up to high school. Because I went to a special school for people with disabilities. And, then going from, almost like the pond to a river, or maybe even the ocean, of a couple of thousand students was a big jump for me to get, engage and introduce myself to new people that I didn't know. I didn't know anybody walking onto that campus for the first time. And then there was a few weeks that I went and I wasn't feeling good at night. Didn't sleep well. Was concerned about my classes and concerned about learning and everything. And then I found out that they had a Chi Alpha Christian group on the campus. And I went to that meeting and I started to, meet new people, met one of my closest friends who I'm still connected to this day. And, after that first meeting, yes, it was still difficult for me. Yes, it still took me a little longer to continue on to finish that degree, but I was able to finish. And, during that time, I even asked my mom, I said, how long do you think it will take me to finish college? She said, I don't care if it takes you, like 10 years as long as you finish. Well, it took me 4 years in a 2-year community college, and then I decided to go on to Bible college to study youth ministry. And during that time, while I was in college, I was always connected to my mom, always connected to my dad, and calling them on a regular basis. Wanted to talk to my mom and say hello to her and see how she's doing and everything. And then back in 2002, I got a notice that my mom had a stroke in September of that year. And then in December 7th, 2002, I got another call on that night. I was trying to get a hold of my mom, couldn't get a hold of her, worried about, hey, why can't I get a hold of her? Can't get a hold of my dad, different things like that. And then I finally got a call that my mom had passed away due to complications from the stroke. But I continue on anyway. I went home, part of the funeral and everything, and I continued on. And on May 5th, 2005, I crossed the stage to receive my Bachelor of Arts degree in youth ministry.
All right, thank you so much, Jack. So, what goals and dreams are you still pursuing?
Well, my goals and dreams right now is to grow my podcast, to expand my podcast, that hopefully it reaches more people and it continues to grow and continues to get more listens and everything. And, I'm still single to this day, so hopefully one day I'll find the woman of God that he has for me as well. And then, maybe get back into ministry again at some point to travel and to speak again like I was.
All right, Jack. So, what inspired you to write your book and share your story?
It was a lot. It was people telling me, "Hey, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. You need to write a book." And that was a lot. A lot of that was during my time when I was traveling and when I was speaking. So I started to, you know, write it a little here, a little there. And then in 2016, I published the first edition of the book. And then in 2020, I did I did a new edition, a second edition of the book, and I re-edited it and, republished it again in 2020.
All right, Dosi. So, looking back, what has been the greatest highlight of your life so far?
I think the greatest highlight was graduating college. Was being able to, you know, let all the downers and the doubters and the people that said, "Hey, he's probably not going to make it," you know, to be able to go back to them and say, "Hey, I did what you told me I wouldn't be able to do, and I did it, and I got my degree, and I got my two associate's degrees and my one bachelor's degree, and I was able to do what you told me I couldn't do."
Okay, so if you could leave listeners with one message from this our conversation, what would you want that to be?
Whatever you're dealing with and whatever you're struggling with, I would just say, don't give up. Keep pursuing your dreams. Don't let people tell you that you can't do something and that you're not going to be able to accomplish, your goals and your dreams, but to keep pursuing them and keep your faith in God and to keep moving forward.
Okay, thank you so much, Dosi. Thank you for sharing your remarkable story of faith, resilience, and courage. Your journey reminds us that our circumstances don't define our future. So, if you'd like to learn more about Dosi and his work, be sure to check out his book and ministry. And I thank you all for listening to today's episode. So, Dosi, for those who may not know how they can get your book and check out your ministry and connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, my book is on Amazon. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Overcomer, Discovering God's Plan Against All Odds. And you can check out my website at www.dorseyrossministries.com and also my podcast at www.dorseyrosshow.com as well.
All right, once again, thank you so much for coming to my show. And do have a wonderful day ahead filled with love.
Will do.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.